Hi there everyone, welcome to webinar number 1. We've just got a couple more people I think are due to sign on, so I'll sort of give it a minute or so. That's why I was waiting a minute or two before I've just logged on as well. I don't want to get too into the middle of all the topics before everyone's arrived and logged on and all the rest of it. But good to see a few of you are here. Hope the technology was okay. I think that's been the biggest part of the sort of general message I'm getting across. People have been very receptive to and like the idea of it. I think the whole word webinar and the technology has been stumping a few people, so I hope downloading the software and getting online was all quite smooth for you. Just to give a little bit of a run through on how the technology works, you should be able to see exactly what's on my screen. So as I start to navigate around on my computer, then you'll be able to see that the screen is changing and you have full view of that. So these are the slides obviously I'm going to be walking you through. Also there's going to be a chat box that you have, I think, to the right hand side. So that's where you can make any comments or ask any questions throughout the presentation. There will be a question and answer session at the end, so actually that will be the main forum to do that. Okay, brilliant. Jackie just said that there's 3 of them around the one computer, so that's good. Good to know that we've got a bigger audience than anticipated already. So I think really what I'll do, I said that's probably the technology, and Jackie's already noticed that there's the chat box on there. So by all means, type away, and I'll either answer it in the moment or I might leave that till the end of the session to answer after the slides. Also, if you want to say anything more anonymously, whether it's a question or a general statement, but you don't want me to read out your name, then say so. But otherwise, I treat this like we're all in one room in a training room, and yeah, everyone, it's sort of a safe environment. Everyone who attends, and there's a confidentiality, but equally everyone within this should sort of share the experience and be able to say things to each other if they want to via me. So I hope that all makes sense. Okay, so I think I will crack on now. So a little introduction here. Sort of 3 areas really I wanted to just tick off, so if you haven't come across me before. That's the picture of the ugly chap that's going to be presenting to you just there. And obviously if you hadn't already realised, I'm not on a live video stream, so you're not going to see me presenting this live, but you'll hear me talking you through it live and then using pictures and other various things on the screen here as well. So my personal experiences are that I have SMA, which is called spinal muscular atrophy. This has been since birth. It's a genetic disability. It means that I use a wheelchair and I have 24/7 care, and we'll move on to those in more detail later. But anyway, my disability is called SMA. I have a master's degree. I live independently in London, have a pretty hectic social life, a world traveller, and I have lots more cool plans for life as well. I'm not by no means done yet. Professional experience-wise, work experience is sort of during my school and uni days. I did a various amount of voluntary work experience just to boost the CV up a little bit. And then straight out of uni, I got a job in administration at the National Disability Charity Scope. Just so we've got a hello from Chris as well. So thank you there, Chris. Good to see you joining in. So I say at Scope, I did a lot of different roles actually. Mainly in the end it was around fundraising, but in a more strategic sense. But I also did diversity training. I was very heavily involved in their campaigning, did lots of research as well, and various other parts around the media and PR too. And that was for 5 years. I'm also a freelance journalist. I've written for Disability Now. I've been the Personalisation ambassador for Hackney Council, which has involved some press work and doing some talks around the issue on personalisation. And generally, the last couple of years I've been running a blog and become much more immersed in the world of social media and new media. So the present day is that I'm now running my own social enterprise just on my Todd. I'm aiming to change the world for disabled people, but by using social new media, I'm able to actually connect in with a lot of other disabled people as well, and sort of do collaborative projects and also do something exactly like we're doing right here now, the webinars. So really I'm combining all of the above, both my personal and professional experiences, to make a difference for disabled people. So we'll move on. So as you'll have known when you signed up, your outcomes are a reminder of personalisation from someone with a disability, how to identify opportunities from personalisation, some ideas around market research and service user engagement, and understanding of having a viable business model. Now, I'm aware some of that can almost sound a bit jargonistic, but believe me, when we go into the presentation, I've tried to bring that sort of reality to both as a disabled person, but also from a broader perspective around the challenges that service providers have and the general issues that are involved in this. So we will uncover that in a sort of more logical detail. And then in terms of going through what I've just said, really, I'm going to have a little chat about my story and putting into context the need for social care and personalisation. There's the disability diamond theory, which is a theory that I've created and written, and I've got a free ebook coming out at the end of the week that will sort of explain to people exactly what this, but you're the lucky guys that get to hear the original rollout, which is quite cool. Personalisation of my life, and then the three other areas that we just discussed. So my story, I've used this more with pictures than PowerPoint words because it makes it a little bit more interesting for you guys, hopefully. The first picture at the top left is me in my calipers in my old wheelchair. So I used to be able to stand up and keep my physio and my sort of physical needs seen to, but also while being mobile and active. And you can see that my cousins are hitching a lift on the back as well, which was always quite a favourite. But I just think, broadly to explain the childhood years, I was very lucky that I was able to go to the local primary school, and I was the only disabled person in the school, and the school were very helpful in putting up ramps and providing the right support by other staff members and essentially making sure that I was included and I was able to access the right level of education for myself, but that my physical needs were seen to as well. And they were a very good school, and that was a good experience. And I think as a result I was very included socially as well. So I had lots of local friends that I was able to have sleepovers with and all the rest of it that comes with social interaction. So both from education and social inclusion, I was very lucky to have that, really. The second picture is meant to be a sort of teenage rebellion style picture. I don't think I was actually a teenager there, but you get the gist. And I think, without going into lots of details, the teenage years for anyone are very difficult when you're sort of going through school and trying to work out what it is you want to do with the rest of your life. But when you have a disability, obviously things can be more complex. So there was lots of things around how I wanted to go out clubbing with friends, or sort of not sure what kind of education I wanted to be going through, with the sort of outcome of the right jobs that would fit my likes and wants, but also again around my disability and my limitations. The third picture there on the top right, that's my first ever car. So through Motability, the local community helped to fundraise for some of the money towards it, and Motability put the rest towards it. And basically I was able to access at the rear of the vehicle all on a remote touch button, and then drive all the way up to the front where I would steer it from, and the chair would clamp in automatically, so I would stay in my electric wheelchair, and it was all hand controls. And I learnt to drive that when I was at university, and that was an absolute lease of independence and not having to worry about inaccessible tubes and difficulties on the buses. I'm sure you're all aware with the service users that you support as well. So that's my car, and that's a big part of my life. I do have a newer car now. It's a little bit smaller as well, because as you can see, that Sprinter was a bit of a tank, but it was the only car at the time that they could adapt for my needs. So that's my car. Then going down to the bottom left, that's on my graduation day at Coventry University with my mum and my dad and my sister. And again, sort of mentioning the early years, I've been very lucky to have a very supportive family and close friends as well. So the middle one there, that was taken at the service provider conference last summer, and that was around my personalisation ambassador role. But I think, broadly, without going to all the many different minefields of work with a disability, you can well imagine that applying for jobs was quite difficult. And even when I got my job at Scope, who are a disability charity and very in tune with that world, there were still various obstacles that I had to overcome personally around being able to do my job properly, and I found out about things around access to work funding and support, and so that there was a lot of experience that I gained throughout those years of working as a disabled person rather than the sort of professional side as well. And then the last two pictures are myself in Hollywood at the bottom. So as I say, I'm a bit of a world traveller, and that was when I got to visit California and Las Vegas last year. That was a great, very, very great trip. And on the right, that's me in a microlight plane. So when I had a bit of a downtime a couple of winters ago with one of my chest infections, I decided that I would look for something quite out there and crazy to do once I was better in the summer months. So having had a look around, I saw there was an adapted flying scheme down in Salisbury, and basically booked it up. And then last August, it sort of time swung around a bit quicker than I'd anticipated, and was horrified to realise that I was actually off to fly a plane on that given weekend. So I drove down, and they made sure I was comfortable in the plane and padded me up and strapped me in well. And we took off, and we flew over Stonehenge. And that was absolutely amazing experience of being up in the air in this tiny little plane and being able to steer it. So I think that kind of shows my more adventurous side, and the way that I kind of pick something that I want to do personally. I then decompose the barriers in the way and then find the solutions to get out there and do it and achieve my goals. So this is the disability diamond theory. I think probably I could do a 2-hour presentation on this alone, but really I want to use this as a little bit of a background context at the moment to what we're going to move on to, and obviously this is about you guys, the service providers. But where I'm trying to take my work with disabled people in my social media context is really taking everything I've just talked you through personally, but also having talked with lots of other disabled friends as well. And when I was sort of trying to think of a way to give an overarching summary and a model and a theory whereby an individual can still go out and feel that they have more control over what their goals are and how they reach them, rather than maybe feeling that the government aren't providing enough money, or there isn't the right support, or society has a bad attitude to disabled people, which can be barriers in themselves. But what I'm trying to create is where you're more in control of your destiny, and you use the means that are already available to the best of your ability. But then obviously as a separate conversation, we know there are lots of other things that could be improved and better provision for disabled people in different ways. So the gist of the theory really is, if you look at the diagram on the left-hand side, it's the life stages. So there's parents of a disabled young person, because the webinars and the blogs that I write and other things I'm running are actually more aimed at a parent when it's the younger years, because clearly a young disabled person wouldn't really be interested as such with the webinar. But also it's the parents that make those decisions. So to look at education and social inclusion as being important factors, and trying to stress to parents that inclusion is possible, but obviously, as I said, you have to have the right support to underpin that, then they're the two very important areas there. And as you go up, you've got the teenage years. So I felt again that social inclusion, going out with your friends and all the things your friends do, being at the right school for the right education for your needs, etc. And also work experience, so starting to get your CV a little bit boosted. If you can get those two life stages absolutely sorted, then you give yourself the best possible platform to go off into the big bad world on your own and be able to live independently. By the way, I know there's a couple of typos on the diagram itself. It's all a work in progress, and the designer's already got the sentiments to correct the spellings for the final edition. So apologies for any spelling mistakes there. So then as you go up, from my opinion, independent living was by far the hardest and broadest thing that I had to overcome. I think one thing to say is, as I've been talking through my story and talking through this theory, it's very easy to make it sound easy, and things have been just a blast and so much fun, but there's been a lot of times where things are very, very difficult, and I questioned why I was doing it and what I wanted to do, and if these barriers were possible to overcome. So I want to stress that none of this is ever easy for a disabled person, and there's a lot of complex issues at stake, and independent living is probably one of the hardest. And I know that when I made my big move to London for my dream sort of job and dream move to the big capital, to find accessible housing, to get my personal care set up through social care, to get all the right equipment and the necessary means of transport alongside my already, engaged employment. It was a very, very, very difficult time. But then I think the whole idea of why an individual would go through all of these different life stages and overcome all of these goals is so that at the very top on the left there you can see life fulfillment and adventure. And I think, career progression is about that a disabled person shouldn't just work. They should actually be in a job that they enjoy going to, and it provides them with the means to go off and do other things out of work that they enjoy. So the kind of whole area around career progression, I think, is very important for disabled people to aspire to more than just be employed. And then obviously with leisure, I think, day in, day out, we should all be able to get out, meet friends, go for coffee, go for dinners, and all the complexities that would still come with that. That's another goal in itself. And then obviously adventure and travel for those who so choose to go out, around the world and visit new places and meet new sort of people and cultures and have new experiences, then again they should be able to do that. So really the disability diamond theory empowers an individual, and this is a lot of the work that I'm doing elsewhere to give different webinars and blogs and videos about how to actually overcome all of those individual goals. And then to summarise the way I would say to people to do that would be my overall philosophy, so we're looking on the left-hand side of the slide now, would be to set aspirational goals. So, I don't think an individual should just choose to have their own house and that's the end of it because it's a big enough goal. That is a goal and that will take a long while, but equally once they've got their own means of, for example, accommodation, they should then be aspiring, to make their house look nice, but also to then move on to other different goals, such as career progression. But then obviously, to identify the barriers that are in the way, and that would be both through their disability, but maybe around mindset and confidence and skills as well. And then the final part of my philosophy is grab life, because I just think we only live on this world once, and it's all about having fun and getting out there and doing it and not dwelling on the can'ts. And then I would say the resources that I would use would be the knowledge of what your goals should be, what the barriers are and what the solutions are, your mindset, which should be around positivity, never giving up, can-do attitude, all those types of things. The people would be friends, family, and again where I think service providers come in, it's professionals. Professionals are so key to helping disabled people realise that they can do lots of great things and they should be aspirational, and then helping provide them with the means to facilitate and overcome those barriers. Technology is massively important, electric wheelchairs, my adaptive car, ramps on buses. I could go on and on and on, but you get the point. There's lots of different parts of technology that would act as a resource. Funding, obviously everything costs, and there's a general sentiment that if something costs money because of having a disability, then that should really be funded by the government or by maybe a charity can help. But certainly if you're working hard, you shouldn't have to then be putting all of your disposable income on something as fundamental as just a wheelchair. So it's around working out the right ways of finding funding. And I think I still put campaigns in there because it's important that when a school isn't accessible or an employer is being discriminatory, then there quite clearly is a need to shout out and protect your rights and campaign against that as a means to progressing on. But I just think sometimes there can be a tendency for disabled people to only see the problems of service provision and want to sort of moan about it, whereas actually there is so much, in this day and age compared to 20, 30 years ago, that is far more progressed and positive that should be looked at first, and then only when there is a hole in that provision should someone then want to quite rightly campaign and come together collectively with other disabled people and generally people interested in disability and go on marches such as the hardest hit. So that's the kind of framework that I now am working within, and by all means, another time if you ever want to talk more about this and feed in your thoughts and kind of explore it a little bit more with me, I'd be more than happy to do that. So moving on to personalisation of my life, I've just quickly listed a few advantages and disadvantages. I think, a lot of the things you all have already heard and you'll be aware of, but to put it in the context, so I mentioned earlier that I have a 24-hour care package. I have 3 PAs on a full-time rota. One of them works Monday to Friday, and the other 2 alternate Friday to Monday, so alternate weekends. So between the 3 of them, I have someone available to help me with everyday tasks. So I need help with hoisting, with showering, with cooking, with cleaning, with getting out and socialising as well. So it is actually, my disability is so severe that the things I can actually do myself are very limited. But then with the investment from the local council and the people such as my PAs, so we're going back to the resources there, I'm able to then go out and do all the things that I have done and plan to do. So obviously the advantages of having this set up for me, and I'm aware that other individuals will differ, but for me personally, it's to have that choice and control. So I have spontaneity. For example, I'm able to wake up in the morning when I want to wake up. So if on a Saturday, I'm feeling a bit tired because I've been out the night before with my friends, or not maybe feeling totally great, then I would be able to just call in my care assistant to come and get me up at that point. And also in terms of personal relations, I have a good relationship and continuity with my PAs. So having taken a while for them to be trained up on my needs, they now have been working with me so long that they're sort of intuitive to what my needs are, and that makes my life a lot easier, so I can concentrate on running my social enterprise or enjoying life and seeing my friends, and not constantly having to worry about if my PAs understand my needs and keeping that part of my world in check, which at periods I have had to do, and it is very difficult and very tiring. So personalisation has enabled that part of my life to not be as big a worry or stress of different people coming in maybe every day. So overall the advantages are that I'm able to just get on and live my life. Obviously the disadvantages, certainly for me at the beginning, was it was a big responsibility. The amount of things I do have to still do under my personal budgets are far more than I ever would have imagined as a child. The reason I do it is because of the advantages, because it's the means to an end, but I've had to learn how to recruit PAs, how to deal with my budget so that I know what I pay them and when I've got enough left over for the taxes and all the other costs that come in, such as liability insurance, that I'm able to understand and carry out those skills, and that took a long while. But even now I have a supportive family who will always help with that, and I'm aware of organisations that can provide assistance in different parts of those as well. And obviously another part, potentially a disadvantage, is it requires confidence, and I think now I feel quite confident with it all, but I can remember at the beginning feeling quite overawed by the whole thing. Actually, it was a very scary process to get used to. So I think, that summarises where I'm at with my personal budget. So moving on to yourselves, I hope that has given you a good context of where I'm coming from. In terms of, I think, firstly I wanted to address some of the service provider concerns that I've picked up from being the personalisation ambassador at Hackney. And this isn't an exhaustive list, and it will apply to some and not others. It's a very generic list. But from what I've seen really is that certain service providers are maybe worried that service users would not want that responsibility from feedback that they've had. Some service users maybe don't have the necessary skills. So on both fronts, that would suggest that personalisation maybe isn't right. But then we can also look at exploring the way that the individual can still have a bit more choice and control, but maybe not have to take on all of the different responsibilities that are required. Parents and carers are another part. If there's a very protective parent that feels that their son or daughter are going off and becoming more in control of all the different things they want to get out there and do, any parent understandably will be worried about their child being hurt or injured. I mean, I would say that, I'm lucky that my mum and dad have sort of encouraged me and pushed me out there to get on and do well, but equally they still, had their concerns. For example, when I moved to London, it was the only time my mum and I ever fell out because she didn't really believe it was the right thing for me to move away from the family home, and it's the first time and only time I've had to go against her wishes, which was very, very difficult. So there are a lot of complexities around relationships between service users and their friends and family and embracing personalisation. And also from the service provider's point of view, with having a choice of personal budgets, will enough of the service users choose that particular service, which is obviously where I want to move into in a minute about sustainability and viability. And finally, will a personal budget afford my service? Now, as I've sort of reiterated throughout, I don't work for the council and I don't deal with the creation of how the budgets work or anything like that. But I would say that this is fundamentally the questions that each individual service would need to ascertain throughout. So there would be different, questions to ask depending on your service, and we'll move on to that. But I think broadly that hopefully summarises the different concerns that service providers would have. Chris has just asked me where I moved from. So actually I forgot to mention that earlier, didn't I? I grew up in a little town called St Ives in Cambridgeshire. Everyone always assumed it's St Ives in Cornwall and the whole hedonistic surfing life, but it was a beautiful little market town, quite a quaint little town. So I was under Cambridge Social Services, and even when I went to Coventry University, because I wasn't officially a resident in Coventry, then I was able to stay with my care package in Cambridge. So it was only when I actually moved to London, and thank God I found this amazing 2-bedroom flat that is accessible and caters for my needs as a house, that I was then up in Stamford Hill, so I'm in Hackney, and yeah, the whole transitioning of social care was very, very difficult to begin with. So yeah, I moved from St Ives in Cambridgeshire to here. Chris has said that St Ives is pretty hedonistic too. Well, no comment, but you've seen the pictures, and if you check out my blog, I do share all sides of my life to hopefully encourage other disabled people that anything and everything is possible, and that has to include some hedonism. So, okay, I think we'll move on from the sort of concerns element, but I just wanted to stress that I know there are complexities and changes and difficulties within personalisation from all sides of the fence. So this isn't me rolling up and saying, here we go, here are the answers, it's all simple and easy. There are a lot of difficulties, and I see these as some of those here. So we often talk, well, you've heard me say the word barriers a lot, and those that have looked at the social model will know about barriers. I've put a little definition of a barrier here, but it essentially is just talking about how disabled people are isolated from society because of the barriers that have been built up, often unwittingly, by society. And then, as we'll look on the next slide, they fall into 3 categories in my opinion, but that is the sort of broad definition of barriers. But I would suggest to you that where there are barriers, there are opportunities, certainly within personalisation. So what are the barriers? Well, we look back at the diagram, and if you take any one of those goals within the diagram, and obviously it's going to depend on the individual's impairment. So again, this is where I probably just use my experience of being a wheelchair user, but you can apply the same approach for any individual with a disability. And you would just look at the 3 parts of the social model, which are the physical environment. So when there's a ramp, I'm not disabled, I'm able to get into the room. But when the physical environment has steps and I am disabled, equally attitudinal. For example, a bus driver. When I go to get on a bus, if the bus driver embraces me coming along in my wheelchair and wants to get the ramp out and treat me as a welcomed customer, then I'm very able to get on that bus. But unfortunately, when some bus drivers just see a wheelchair and they have to press a button and get a ramp out, it all can seem a little bit too difficult, a little bit too much, and having that attitude then disables me. And finally, organisational, when I'm maybe applying for a job, if it would take me longer to handwrite and there's a test that is part of the recruitment process, then maybe they would allow for a little bit more time because of my disability and my needs. But equally, they would be reviewing me and analysing my ability to do the job alongside everyone else. So we look at organisational policies and procedures that either disable or include disabled people. So applying those different types of barriers, and we look through, I think the best one to probably present to the service providers of Hackney would be, I'm guessing, around personal care, but I think there would potentially be opportunities for you across the board. But for example, if maybe the sort of older system where the council would recruit a company to do a mass amount of care on like a block contract and then roll that out to lots of individuals who are disabled, and that becomes different when the individuals hold their own individual budgets, then obviously there's a potential for still overcoming that barrier of people needing their own care, but then looking at how that service is provided, maybe tweaking it. Or it could be that if people start to move down the road of, I don't know, recruiting personal assistants, that there's a need for a recruitment angle that can help sort of be the middle organisation to put together PAs with PA users. So that's just a sort of random idea, but you can see that as things change, you can look at it negatively that, things are going to be different and we can't rely on block contracts and we're not sure where the money will come from, and the old style is going out the window. But actually, just because things will change, there are benefits, I think, certainly for disabled people and its own complexities and issues to deal with. But from a service provider angle, I do believe that there are as many new opportunities as there are potential pitfalls to this model. And also I'd put at the bottom out of the social model context, but I do believe that barriers can be a disabled person's mindset and skills. And again, I think, to have advocacy and peer-to-peer support, which are all things that go on, will remain absolutely necessary for disabled people to become more and more equal in society. And it's totally up to service providers to be able to provide those types of services for disabled people. So there's plenty of opportunities. It's just maybe the way that they're delivered or the sort of different intricacies might be altered, but only you know how that will work. I'm just trying to put forward some different ideas and different angles, and it'd be good to have your feedback at the end on what you think of all this as well. So is this viable and sustainable? Well, I think that the bolded word there, new definition, sums it up. I think, as I said, disabled people need to learn a whole load of new skills and to become more aspirational and to utilise the opportunities that are available, but then equally learn lots of new skills and go through quite a big change themselves. And as we've talked about the complexities for service providers, I think it's going to redefine the purpose of service providers as well. And so really I think any individual organisation or people in that sector, it's just a matter of almost starting with a blank sheet of paper and looking at the bigger picture and saying to the people that you want to support, what is it that you want from life? So it's about drawing out the overall goals that disabled people want, not what services do you require, but what overall is it you want out of your life, and then working together with disabled people to help put all the jigsaw puzzle together to overcome those barriers. And I would foresee the way to do that, and whether this would be every individual service provider or probably more as a collective, so there's one massive bit of research that could collate all of this together, would be quantitative and qualitative research. So what do I mean by that? Well, that's essentially numbers, lots of numbers of the sort of types of people that would require types of services, but also the qualitative research, the more subjective and emotional side of what disabled people want. And the way I would really see that being carried out is with questionnaires, would be the sort of more quantitative side, and interviews and focus groups with disabled people. Now, for the record, I'm sure lots of this goes on lots of the time already, so I'm not suggesting it doesn't happen and I'm coming and reinventing the wheel, but from my perspective, they would be the different channels by which to engage disabled people, and that's the method of doing it. But I think the overall point and the purpose of those engagements would have to be about the life goals aspect, and then working out what the right services should be off the back of that. And you might find that the service you're already running is absolutely what is demanded and needed, and it's just that the way that maybe the payments will come in through individual budgets rather than the council is only different. And then with that, you'd have to look at how you would market and communicate the actual service to disabled people. But this slide here is basically market research, and it's just saying that you are serving a customer, and the best way to serve the best product or service is to ask that exact customer what it is they want and give it to them. So that's a little bit, my master's degree was marketing, so I'm trying to feed some of the sort of marketing in, but applying it to the disability community, obviously for the sort of best outcome for all concerned. So then moving on really, so you know what is demanded and potentially what you could be sort of supplying to disabled people, but it's still a matter of, is it sustainable as a kind of business model? And this is where there's a need to crunch the numbers. So you would, having defined what it is that is demanded, you'd obviously look at what the costs are of providing that service. You'd then look at what price would work for the service users' budgets. So I don't know whether that would be talking with the council or with lots of individuals once they've got their budgets, but basically working out what sort of amount is available to buy in different services. And then finally, how many service users you would need to, would be required to break even and make a healthy surplus. So you might find that you could have a viable business model with only 5 service users paying a price that's absolutely affordable, and it's all quite viable and simple. But you might find that in order to drop the price low enough, you'd need lots and lots of service users to buy in, and that then would be a decision you'd have to make if, there would be a sufficient number of people that would buy that service from you. So again, it has to be applied to your individual models and services, but broadly I would say that's the next step towards making it viable. So really this is sort of moving towards a summary part, and I'm keen, I know from the webinars I've done with disabled people that the most valuable part is the question and answer, because you can feed in any additional thoughts you've had, and you can obviously correct anything you don't think I may be spot on with, and equally ask further questions if I haven't explained things as well. So we've got a good amount of time, but in terms of really how I would see all of the stuff I've talked to you before is about to change the world. I would say that you believe in a great quality of life for disabled people, otherwise you wouldn't be in that field in the first place. You know what service users want and the barriers in their way. You're the experts at that. You know how to assist in removing those barriers because you've done it for years, and again, you're the experts in that too. And you know how to make this sustainable, and that would be at the moment, but then also there will be a need to reevaluate and to do some research on that in a future sense. But really I think the key is that it's about constantly engaging with, listening to and working with disabled people. That's the way that you'll know you're providing the right services and that there's a sustainability in the long run. So I think my final thought on that really was to have the right service and the right model and passion equals success for everybody. So what we've covered my story, we've covered the disability diamond theory. I wish I had a trumpet or some kind of fanfare now, because I'm quite excited about the launch of the book on that, and I hope it helped put some things into context for you. Personalisation in my life, and we identified the opportunities that potentially could be available through the different barriers that disabled people face. We talked about communicating with disabled people in order to understand what services are actually required. And then we looked at long-term sustainability, so crunching the numbers and the finances and just making sure everything kind of stacks up. And by the way, that picture on my right is the guy in the middle. I went to school with him, and we had to travel on what we called the special bus together, because the secondary school I went to was not the local one, it was further afield, and I kept in touch with all my local non-disabled friends, and I attended a mainstream secondary school about half an hour away, and the two of us have known each other since day dot. And the other guy on the right I was at university with, and he's a bit of my disability guru, and he's very, very up on his politics and disability rights, and he's been influential in the things that I've been trying to work on more recently. So as I said, we'll move on to the Q&A part now. There's a load of details there if you want to get in touch afterwards on my email, my phone, my Twitter handle. Please do check out my blog, which as I say is where I do daily, well not daily, but certainly a couple of blogs a week, whether it be on overarching articles or just videos of things that I've been up to. And my mantra there for disabled people is about inspiring, informing and changing. I've also got my online magazine, Disability Horizons, which has been going 6 months, and we've got a worldwide sort of community really of readers, but also lots of people writing for us. And then there's Flickr and Tumblr, so there's lots of different ways that you can interact with me after the event. Okay, so by all means start having a bit of a think about the questions or feedback, or I want this to be a two-way process, and this is the first time I've run a webinar for service providers, so I want this to be a kind of a learning process, and for you to now feedback your thoughts on what I've presented, and to ask any other questions that may be helpful to you from my personal experiences of a disabled person. So please do get typing up in your chat boxes. I think what I'll do, we've got a couple coming in, so I will read those out and start answering them in a minute, but I'm just going to mute it and have a quick swig of water because my mouth's about to go dry, and you can start debating what questions you want to ask or what feedback you want to give, and I'll be back in a second. Oh, that's better. Sorry about that. It's, as you all know, when you're talking for 45 minutes, need a little sip of water there. So yeah, we've got a few questions coming in, as I said. The first sort of comment really was, Chris said how it's difficult if you are taking expensive overheads associated with buildings, though. Yeah, I've noticed that. I can totally imagine that the overheads of a business are going to ramp up the costs that are associated, and therefore that has to be passed on to the individual that would be paying for it. I mean, I suppose one question I'd ask is, will there always be need for a building? I don't know, maybe you could tell me, Chris, what your service does, what your area within social care is, to help me understand that personal to you. But I know from when I worked at Scope that the model they've had is there's sort of 50 independent living care homes where, there could be everything from 5 to 30 disabled people that are either residential or using that as a day centre. But what they're trying to do is move away from whereby you're literally going in to a building and having that scene there. Excuse me. But yeah, essentially that you're more out in the community, and so there's a building or a hub that can facilitate, using an accessible toilet with hoists and things like that. But there's maybe not the need for as big a building. And then I don't know other sort of possibilities, but it could just be that if there's lots and lots of service providers that are trying to cut down the overhead, I think when I mentioned around the questionnaires, there's always a positive of collaboration. So as an individual service, you have your expertise and the value that you add, but then by collaborating with other services, there might be ways of keeping overheads down and also complementing each other in an overall holistic service that could be packaged up to disabled people. So there's lots of other thought processes around that. But I'd say I'd be interested to hear what your individual service is, if you wouldn't mind typing it up and sharing. But yeah, if the building is a necessity and clearly it would be expensive, then the number crunching exercise would be included in costing up what it is to actually deliver that service. And as I said, looking at what an individual budget could afford, and looking at the whole sort of, does it stack up, and if not, then you'd have to try and move on from that and look at ways of saving costs, or maybe other ways of getting funding in. I don't know, but that would be my general thoughts on that anyway. Okay, great. Chris has just said it's not for Chris's or their organisation personally, but it's difficult to know how many people will want to access the service until they turn up, for example. There is also the issue of staff ratios, etc. But I think that's where I come back to the market research, that if a massive bit of work could be done where there's actually some hard numbers on the overall number of disabled people in Hackney, and I'm sure a lot of this exists, but then breaking it down would be the numbers that are on individual budgets now and the numbers that should be in the future and all those kind of things. But then actually having direct feedback from individuals as to whether it would be a service that they would attend before you even go to the effort of starting it up. So I think it's always where the key is in the planning. Instead of just saying, well, if we set it up and no one comes along, I agree that would be silly. But if you're able to know in advance the numbers that would purchase it, then you're going to have a better hold and feel if it's viable and a credible way to move forward. So I'd say they're just general thoughts I'm sharing with you. That would be my personal feeling though. So Jackie said, in terms of when you first got your budget, what supports would have been useful in terms of becoming an employer and recruitment and the legal stuff, and what support I got? Okay, sorry, Jackie's just heading off now. So yeah, no worries. What I'm going to do for all of you to know, I've recorded this. So I'll email all the attendees with the video recording and the password, and it would be great if you think any other people would benefit from it. So thanks for attending, Jackie, as well, and I'll deal with your questions for the other delegates now. But yeah, I'll catch up with you again soon. So yeah, I mean, when I first moved and I got my budget, when I went on to personal budgets, it was a little while after I'd been on direct payment. So in pure sense of recruiting a PA, I actually tapped into some contacts that I had already got. But I know a lot of other disabled people are looking into sort of whether there's websites that are available, almost like dating sites, where it takes the needs of the disabled person and then what a PA can offer. And that's a bit random to say dating site, but you get the general sentiment that it then can match up by location or by requirements and sort of put people together in that way. And that's going to be something that's needed more and more as people recruit personal assistants. In terms of all the general advice, there was an organisation called the Rowan organisation that I used, and they were very helpful around the sort of payroll and the legal side. But I think really, I don't know if something like that exists in Hackney, but there would certainly be a central need that someone could go to that kind of support. And I say in terms of I arrived in Hackney on direct payments, but I then was shifted on to personal budgets last springtime. And so from literally having money for a care package, it was more outcome focused. So I was able to take, well, my first outcome was that I wanted to maintain my care package because that was fundamental. I then wanted to participate in more of a kind of physical health part of life because when I left school that just fell off a cliff and I didn't do any physio or swimming and my physical well-being was deteriorating. So I wanted to find a way to facilitate that. And the third part was to do some form of kind of travel, more adventurous side. So obviously the council were able to facilitate maintaining my care and supporting me with that side, and I already held a lot of that relevant information from sort of having learned it a few years prior. But then the other two weren't about money, it was about information. So the first thing was I was told that Clissold Park, my local swimming pool, had a floor that would raise up and I would be able to get on like a shower chair onto this sort of raised floor and then lowered into the water. So basically I could go swimming again, which was amazing. I've been doing that now for 18 months and my health's improved so much and I'm so enjoying being able to go swimming again. It's amazing. So that was where a simple bit of information was so invaluable. And then the third part was my social worker put me in contact with various websites and other places that were able to help facilitate going on a trip abroad. So, I think the world travel thing is maybe not as relevant to Hackney, although I think if the right individuals could, help disabled people to aspire to those things, if that's what they would want genuinely, and don't just sort of put it off because they think it's too hard, there would be a lot of value placed in that. And I think it's just then being a bit innovative about how that is funded, whether that would still come from the council or from the personal budget or would be backed by third parties is stuff that would have to be looked into. But I think, an individual who is trying to do something such as travelling and would need assistance on the how, they should hold a value on that within their personal budget to buy in some expertise and advice. So that for me was my 3 broad personalisation outcomes and how that went. And I think coming back to Jackie's original comment, it's really about your social worker, peer-to-peer support, and, having sort of more prominent organisations that you're aware of that I would have used, but they didn't exist or I didn't know about them. So I think there is a need to centralise that and share and help with that. Jackie said, do you have any additional case studies of people and their experiences of having budgets and reaching the pinnacle of the diamond? Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of good friends that have had similar sort of journeys to myself where, childhood is like anyone else's. It can be difficult and there's lots of things to overcome, and it's about good family and friend support. And then the independent living part, as I've stressed, is the hardest of all, and I, definitely found so many aspects of that difficult, and a lot of my friends are exactly the same. They've, struggled to get the right funding, they struggled to find the right PAs, they struggled to find accessible housing. It really is a struggle to get through the independent living part. But now I'm 28, I'm in my late 20s, and I think all of my friendship group have persevered really and stuck with it, and they've either got exactly what they needed or sometimes have settled and learnt to cope with things that maybe weren't as they should have been, but essentially they are now, set up independently and have therefore moved on to travelling and career progression and accessing a healthy, social life. So I do know many other people, and obviously every individual impairments is different, as I've said. Every individual barriers in the way will differ, and the solutions and using the different resources on that actual diamond I gave you will differ too. But I think if you have that mindset and that, support from the right places, then I do know lots and lots of people that have been able to move on. So yeah, absolutely, there are others. It's not just like only myself has done that. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't know if anyone else wants to ask any more. I think, as I said, you've got my contact details, so it'd be great to keep this dialogue going, and I'm very much sort of learning as I go with trying to use all the different things that I do online and working with disabled people, all over the world as well. I'm doing some webinars in Australia and America as well. So, if I can ever help feed some of that general stuff back in to you of what disabled people are thinking and wanting, then I will happily do that. But obviously, yeah, I know that Hackney in itself has its own sort of setup, and there'll be specifics that maybe I'm not as aware of as I hope to become more aware of in the future. So Chris is saying, can you give advice on places to advertise services to disabled people? I mean, there's the general magazines like Disability Now and things like that. I think really, I will always bang the social media drum. I'm not a big charity. I'm not a disability charity. I'm not a big company. I'm not, a social worker or like a sort of trained professional. I'm literally, moving forward, having got lots of life experience and then articulating it through social media. And I've built up, it's over 10,000 people interact with my blog and my magazine, and that's just one individual. So I would say that you can tap in to, that kind of area very, very easily and quickly with no cost. So social media would be a big one. In terms of, you said, do people read them? Yes, I think maybe Disability Now is aimed at an older disabled audience. And I think many people would read the classifieds when they're looking for specific information. So if you think that yours, or if someone thinks their service would fit in, then it might be worth with the classifieds. But I think really I would come back to overall, if you're looking to not spend much or at all on advertising to disabled people, it's about plugging in with things like Twitter and Facebook and influential bloggers and influential charities that can quite frankly disseminate and share that information. So again, if any of you want to have a chat about social media and new media applied to disability, I'd be very happy to have that conversation another time as well. So I think that seems to be the end of the questions. We're just coming up to 3, so we've gone through a whole hour. I hope that's been useful and interesting for you all. As I say, I'll email out a quick questionnaire if you wouldn't mind filling that out. It would be great to get a bit of feedback on the good, the bad and the ugly. And if any sort of other thoughts come afterwards, whether they be questions or ideas, and certainly I'm keen to work with you guys on helping the sort of personalisation agenda work. I passionately believe that it's the right thing for disabled people idealistically, but I know that it's going to be very difficult for individuals with disabilities to overcome and get used to the skills and the responsibilities needed, and obviously for service providers to get used to this absolutely new way of working. But I think only by talking about it and sharing and coming together will we be able to work it all out. So thank you for your time. I hope you found it enjoyable and helpful, and I also hope to see you again another time soon. But take care for now. Bye bye.